Samuel Washington had spent 7 years invisible, mopping floors while engineers in white coats ignored the brilliance he'd buried to keep his family safe, watching his 17-year-old daughter Ariel sketch impossible engine designs in notebooks that no one would ever see, filling page after page with solutions to problems that stumped teams of PhD graduates, until the day CEO Walter Grange caught her in his restricted lab muttering about backward torque distribution and made the biggest mistake of his corporate career. He dared the janitor's daughter to fix what his million-dollar team couldn't, thinking he'd found the perfect victim for public humiliation, never realizing he'd just handed a loaded weapon to someone who'd been waiting her whole life to pull the trigger and show the world what happened when you underestimated the wrong. Family, just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The Morning Sun cast, long shadows across the sprawling Grange Tech automotive research facility, its glass walls reflecting the promise of innovation. Inside, the massive R&D floor hummed with activity, as robotic arms moved with mechanical precision, assembling engine components while sparks flew from welding stations. High-performance engine prototypes lined the walls like trophies, each representing millions in development costs. Samuel Washington moved quietly through this world of cutting-edge technology, his mop bucket wheels squeaking against the polished concrete floor. At 52, he had grown accustomed to being invisible. Engineers in pristine white coats walked past him as if he were equipment, their conversations filled with technical jargon that most assumed was beyond his understanding. He methodically worked across the oil-stained floor, erasing evidence of another day's experiments and failures. But Samuel wasn't just cleaning. His trained eye caught details others missed: how a prototype's cooling system was positioned incorrectly, how an exhaust manifold created unnecessary back pressure. These observations lived quietly in his mind, never spoken in this place where his opinion wasn't welcome. Outside in the employee parking lot, 17-year-old Ariel Washington sat in her father's aging Honda Civic, notebook spread across her lap. Her fingers, permanently stained with graphite and grease, moved quickly across the page as she sketched detailed turbocharger schematics from memory. The drawing showed intricate components, compressor wheels, wastegate actuators, intercooler pathways, all rendered with precision of someone who had rebuilt dozens of engines using salvaged parts her father brought home. Ariel had been waiting for Samuel after school for 3 years, filling 17 notebooks with engine designs, improvement ideas, and theoretical modifications that most engineering students wouldn't attempt until senior year. She understood her father's position was her window into a world typically closed to people like them, and she absorbed every detail. When Samuel emerged from the building, he found Ariel absorbed in her latest sketch. He paused, watching his daughter work with the same intensity he remembered from his own engineering days, before those dreams had been derailed. "Let me guess," Samuel said, settling into the driver's seat. "You figured out how to make their engines run cleaner and more efficiently again?" Ariel looked up, eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, look at this. If they repositioned the intercooler here and modified the airflow pattern, they could increase efficiency by at least 12%. It's so obvious, but they're missing it." Samuel started the car, expression growing serious. "Baby girl, what have I told you about that kind of talk? These people didn't hire me to think, and they sure didn't hire me to have a daughter who thinks she knows better than their engineers." But Ariel's mind was already racing ahead to possibilities. She had grown up hearing her father's stories about the old days when he worked in actual engine development, before everything changed. She knew he still had the knowledge, still saw the flaws others missed. The difference was, she hadn't learned to keep quiet about what she saw. The next day brought unusual buzz to the Grange Tech facility. Word had spread that Walter Grange, the company's powerful and intimidating CEO, would be hosting a special showcase for potential investors and military contractors. The presentation would center around their most ambitious project yet, an experimental engine prototype that had consumed nearly 2 years of development and $8 million in funding. Samuel arrived early, beginning routine maintenance in areas that would be off-limits once the presentation began. He moved efficiently through restricted sections, cleaning spaces that would soon be filled with VIPs who expected perfection. When Ariel arrived that afternoon, Samuel met her at the employee entrance with an unusual request. I need you to wait by my locker today instead of in the car. There's some kind of big presentation happening, and I don't want you wandering around where you might get in trouble. But as Samuel led her through the facility's corridors, Ariel became distracted by an unfamiliar sound, a deep, rhythmic buzzing that seemed to pulse through the building's structure. Her engineering instincts kicked in immediately, analyzing the frequency and trying to identify its source. "Dad, what's making that noise?" she asked. But Samuel was already being called away by his supervisor to handle a spill in one of the main laboratories. "Just wait right here," Samuel said, gesturing toward the employee lockers. "I'll be back in 15 minutes. But curiosity was stronger than obedience. The buzzing continued to pulse through the building, and she found herself drawn toward its source. She moved carefully through corridors she had never explored, following the sound deeper into the facility's restricted areas. She passed several doors marked with warning signs before reaching one that stopped her cold. Experimental engines. Authorized access only. The buzzing was loudest here. Ariel checked the hallway in both directions, saw it was empty, and tried the handle. To her surprise, it turned easily. The room beyond took her breath away. It was enormous, with a ceiling stretching up 3 stories and filled with equipment she had only seen in technical manuals. Digital displays covered every wall, showing readouts for temperature, pressure, torque, and dozens of other metrics. But at the center sat something that made her heart race. The engine prototype was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a small car, with components arranged in configurations that defied traditional automotive engineering principles. Copper tubes snaked between titanium housings, while sensors and monitoring equipment created a web of connections suggesting this machine was designed for performance levels far beyond civilian transportation. But even as she marveled at the engine's complexity, Ariel's trained eye began picking up problems. The fuel delivery system was routing through an unnecessarily complicated pathway that would create pressure drops. The cooling system appeared to be fighting against itself, with heat exchangers positioned in ways that would actually impede thermal management. And the torque distribution model, she could see it clearly in the physical layout, was completely backward. "This is all wrong," she whispered, pulling out her notebook and beginning to sketch corrections. How did they miss something so basic? She was so absorbed that she didn't hear footsteps approaching, or notice the room filling with people until a voice behind her said, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future of automotive engineering." Ariel spun around to find herself facing a room full of people in expensive suits, their attention focused on a tall, imposing figure near the main entrance. Walter Grange was exactly what she had expected from her father's descriptions. Intimidating, commanding, and clearly accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "What you see before you," Walter continued, gesturing toward the massive prototype, "represents 2 years of development by our most talented engineers. This revolutionary design will power the next generation of high-performance vehicles, delivering unprecedented efficiency and power output." But as Walter spoke, Ariel couldn't help herself. The errors in the engine's design were so glaring, so fundamental, that staying silent felt impossible. Without thinking about consequences, she muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Your torque distribution model is backward." The effect was immediate and electric. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the teenage girl standing near the prototype with a notebook in her hands and grease stains on her fingers. The silence stretched on for several heartbeats as Walter processed what had just happened. "I'm sorry," Walter said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Did someone just interrupt my presentation to offer engineering advice?" Ariel felt every eye focused on her, but instead of backing down, she lifted her chin and spoke clearly. "The torque distribution model is backward. The way you have the drivetrain configured, it's going to create massive inefficiencies and probably catastrophic failure under load." Walter's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost amused. Here was an opportunity too perfect to pass up, a chance to demonstrate his company's superiority while providing entertainment for his guests. He gestured for Ariel to come forward. "Please, by all means, enlighten us," Walter said, his voice carrying just enough mockery to make his intentions clear. "Tell us what our team of Ivy League engineers missed that you apparently can see." As Ariel walked toward the front, she heard murmurs from the assembled VIPs. "Who is that kid? How did she get in here? Is this part of the presentation?" Walter held up his hand for silence. "This young lady seems to think she can do what our most qualified engineers couldn't accomplish. I think we should give her that opportunity, don't you?" The suggestion sent a ripple of laughter through the crowd, but Walter wasn't finished. "In fact, I'll make this interesting. If this young prodigy can actually make meaningful progress on our prototype, something our team has been struggling with for months, we'll provide her with a full scholarship to any university she chooses." He paused, letting the offer sink in before delivering the trap. "But if she fails, if she can't back up her bold claims with actual results, then she owes us all a public apology for disrupting our presentation and wasting everyone's time." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Ariel's response. She looked at the massive engine prototype, then at the crowd of expectant faces, and finally at Walter Grange himself. She understood exactly what was happening. This was meant to be her humiliation, a lesson about knowing her place. But she also understood something else. She had been studying engines her entire life, learning from her father's expertise and her own relentless curiosity. She knew what she was looking at, and she knew she was right. "I accept," she said simply. Walter's smile widened. "Excellent. You have 7 days to make progress. I'm sure our facilities management staff can arrange access for you." As if summoned, Samuel appeared at the back of the room, having finally tracked down his missing daughter. The color drained from his face as he realized what was happening. He pushed through the crowd, trying to reach Ariel, but Walter held up a hand to stop him. "Ah, you must be the father," Walter said. "Don't worry about your daughter's safety. Our insurance covers everything, and I'm sure she won't get electrocuted. Much." The comment drew more laughter from the crowd, but Samuel wasn't amused. He looked at his daughter, seeing the determination in her eyes that he recognized from his own younger days, and felt his heart break a little. He knew exactly what Walter was doing, and he knew his daughter was walking into a trap designed to crush her spirit. But he also knew Ariel. If anyone could surprise these people, it would be her. "Ariel," Samuel said quietly, "you don't have to do this." She turned to look at her father, and in that moment, he saw not the little girl who used to help him sort salvaged engine parts, but a young woman who had inherited his passion for engineering along with something he had lost years ago: the courage to fight for what she believed in. "Yes, I do," she said. "I want to prove what I can do." Walter clapped his hands together, clearly delighted. "Wonderful. I'll have my assistant arrange for camera crews to document the process. This will make an excellent case study in the importance of staying in one's lane." As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the unexpected entertainment, Ariel remained standing near the prototype engine. The massive machine suddenly seemed less intimidating and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. They stood alone in the cavernous testing laboratory, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of equipment and the weight of impossible expectations. Ariel stared at the engine prototype that represented everything wrong with how innovation happened in places like this. "Challenge accepted," she whispered, and began planning how she would change everything. The fluorescent lights of the Grange Tech facility cast harsh shadows across the empty laboratory as Ariel used her father's employee ID card to slip through the security checkpoint after hours. The building felt different at night, less hostile, more like the workshop she had always dreamed of accessing. She made her way through darkened corridors to the experimental engine lab, her backpack heavy with tools assembled from her home garage and salvaged parts her father had collected over the years. Standing before the massive prototype in the quiet facility, Ariel could finally examine the engine without the pressure of Walter Grange's mocking audience. She pulled out a small flashlight and began her methodical inspection, taking detailed notes about every component, every connection, every design choice that had led to the machine's current inoperable state. What she discovered was worse than she had initially thought. The engine wasn't just poorly designed, it appeared to have been deliberately sabotaged. Components that should have been aligned were offset by precise amounts that would create maximum stress. Cooling lines had been rerouted through paths that would cause overheating. Most telling, several critical sensors had been disconnected and their wires carefully hidden behind other components. Someone wanted this to fail, she murmured, sketching the evidence in her notebook. But why? She spent the next 3 hours documenting every flaw, every deliberate error, every sign that this prototype had been set up for failure from the beginning. By the time she finished her initial assessment, she had filled 14 pages with notes and diagrams that painted a picture of systematic sabotage disguised as engineering incompetence. Over the following nights, Ariel established a routine. She would arrive after the day shift ended, using Samuel's access card to enter restricted areas where she could work undisturbed. She had assembled a makeshift toolkit from salvaged torque wrenches, analog gauges that her father had rescued, from decommissioned equipment, and custom tools she had fabricated using a 3D printer in her high school's makerspace. The work was painstaking and often frustrating. Many of the engine's components were sealed units that couldn't be opened without specialized equipment, forcing her to work around problems rather than solving them directly. But with each night of investigation, she began to understand the prototype's true potential. Beneath the layers of sabotage and deliberate failure, she could see the outline of something remarkable. Dev Patel had been Grange Tech's lead engineer for 7 years, long enough to become cynical about corporate promises and young enough to still care about actual innovation. He prided himself on being the first to arrive and the last to leave, which was why he noticed the unusual activity in the secure access logs. Someone had been using employee credentials to enter the experimental lab during off hours. His initial assumption was industrial espionage. Perhaps a competitor had bought access from a disgruntled employee. But when he reviewed the security footage, he was surprised to see the same teenage girl who had disrupted Walter's presentation working alone in the lab with an intensity that reminded him of his own early days in engineering. Rather than immediately reporting the security breach, Dev found himself curious about what she was actually doing. He began staying later, watching from the observation deck as Ariel worked with a combination of professional methodology and creative problem-solving. That impressed him despite himself. On the 4th night of her unauthorized access, Dev decided to confront her directly. He entered the lab quietly, expecting to startle her, but found instead that she was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice his presence until he spoke. "Impressive setup," he said, causing Ariel to spin around with a wrench in her hand. Most people would have given up after seeing the sensor array configuration. Ariel's first instinct was to run, but something in Dev's tone suggested curiosity rather than hostility. "I'm not stealing anything," she said quickly. "I'm just trying to understand why it doesn't work." Dev moved closer to examine her notes, which were spread across a makeshift workstation she had created using equipment cases as tables. The sketches and calculations impressed him. They showed a level of understanding that most engineering students wouldn't achieve until their senior year. "Walk me through your thermodynamic analysis," Dev said, testing her knowledge. "Show me how you calculated the heat transfer coefficients." For the next hour, Dev grilled Ariel on technical concepts that should have been far beyond her educational background. But her answers revealed not just theoretical knowledge, but practical understanding gained through hands-on experience. She could explain complex engineering principles using analogies drawn from rebuilding salvaged engines in her backyard. Finally, Dev reached into his laptop bag and pulled out a small electronic module. "Try this instead," he said, handing her a stripped-down microcontroller unit. "Your analog approach is solid, but you'll need digital feedback to handle the pressure variations." As he walked toward the lab exit, he paused and looked back at Ariel. "The night security guard changes shifts at midnight. You'll have a 15-minute window when the cameras reset if you need to move any larger equipment." The advice was delivered so casually that it took Ariel a moment to realize Dev had just become her accomplice rather than her obstacle. That weekend, Samuel joined his daughter in the Grange Tech lab for the first time since she had begun her unauthorized project. He had been reluctant to become directly involved, knowing his job could be threatened if they were caught. But Ariel's growing excitement about her progress had worn down his resistance. As they worked together in the quiet facility, adjusting component alignments and testing new configurations, Samuel found himself remembering why he had fallen in love with engineering in the first place. The satisfaction of solving complex problems, the thrill of seeing a theoretical solution work in practice, the simple joy of building something that hadn't existed before. "Dad," Ariel said as they took a break from rewiring a sensor array, "why didn't you ever tell me you used to work on combustion design?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the prototype engine that represented so many of his own deferred dreams. "Because I didn't want you to dream smaller than you were capable of," he finally said. "I let them convince me that I didn't belong in that world, and I didn't want the same thing to happen to you." Ariel looked at her father with new understanding. "Is that why you brought home all those salvage parts over the years? So I could learn what you weren't allowed to teach me directly?" Samuel nodded. "Every engine you rebuilt in our garage, every problem you solved with spare parts and creativity, that was your real education. I knew that someday you'd have a chance to show what you could do, and I wanted you to be ready." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound from the lab's main computer terminal. Ariel had been running diagnostic programs on the engine's control systems, trying to understand why certain functions remained locked even after she had corrected the physical sabotage. The computer had finally finished processing a data recovery program she had started days earlier. What they found in the recovered files changed everything. The engine's software logs had been deliberately corrupted, but fragments of data remained from 7 years earlier. The same year, Grange Tech had suddenly halted development on this project. The surviving data showed that the engine had actually been functional before someone had systematically dismantled its operating systems. "Someone didn't just want this engine to fail," Ariel said, studying the corrupted timestamps and deleted sensor readings. "They wanted to erase all evidence that it ever worked in the first place." As they dug deeper into the recovered data, they found references to something called Iron Phoenix, apparently a government project that had been terminated abruptly. The engine prototype appeared to have been connected to this project, but the specific nature of the connection had been carefully scrubbed from all accessible records. Meanwhile, across town, Lexi Grange sat in her downtown apartment, struggling with her own complicated relationship to her father's company. At 28, she had spent the last 5 years deliberately distancing herself from Grange Tech, using her trust fund to support tech nonprofits and social justice organizations. But the incident with the teenage girl had stuck with her. There had been something in the girl's eyes, a combination of intelligence, determination, and fearlessness that reminded Lexi of her own younger self before years of watching her father's ruthless business practices had worn down her idealism. She decided to visit the Grange Tech facility incognito, using her knowledge of the building's layout to observe the engineering teams without announcing her presence. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions about her father's leadership style. Engineers worked in an atmosphere of fear and competition, more focused on protecting their positions than pursuing actual innovation. But she also noticed something else. Several engineers were talking about unusual activity in the experimental lab, and there were rumors that someone had actually made progress on the infamous prototype that had become a symbol of the company's most expensive failure. Using her security access and knowledge of the facility's blind spots, Lexi positioned herself in the observation deck above the experimental lab on a Thursday evening when she expected the mysterious teenager to be working. What she saw surprised her. The girl, Ariel, she had learned from facility gossip, worked with a level of focus and competence that put most of Grange Tech's professional engineers to shame. She moved around the massive prototype with confidence, making adjustments that showed deep understanding of the system's interconnected components. As Lexi watched, Ariel completed a modification to the fuel compression system, using what appeared to be a bicycle brake cable and a valve she had machined herself. The improvised solution was elegant in its simplicity, addressing a complex engineering problem with materials that probably cost less than $20 total. When Ariel powered up the engine for testing, Lexi held her breath. The massive machine rumbled to life, running smoothly for nearly 4 seconds before an automatic safety system shut it down. But those 4 seconds represented more progress than Grange Tech's official team had achieved in 2 years of development. The next morning, security footage of the engine's brief operation had somehow found its way to Walter Grange's desk. Rather then being pleased by the progress. Walter's reaction was anger mixed with something that looked almost like panic. He immediately called his public relations team and began crafting a narrative that would minimize Ariel's contributions, while claiming credit for her innovations. But Lexi had seen enough. That evening, she waited in the parking lot outside the Grange Tech facility until she saw Ariel and Samuel leaving together. She approached them carefully, not wanting to seem threatening, and introduced herself simply as someone who had been watching Ariel's work with great interest. "I need to ask you something," Lexi said after explaining who she was. "Do you know what you're really fixing?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that none of them were quite ready to explore. But Ariel understood that her 7-day challenge had evolved into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple bet with an arrogant CEO. Lexi's question about what Ariel was really fixing hung heavy in the air as the three of them stood in the Grange Tech parking lot under pale sodium lights. The weight of unspoken secrets suddenly made the evening feel charged with danger rather than possibility. "There's a diner about 10 minutes from here," Lexi said quietly, glancing around the empty parking lot. "We should talk somewhere that doesn't have security cameras." 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at Murphy's all-night diner, nursing coffee that had been sitting too long while Lexi carefully considered how much truth she was prepared to reveal. Samuel kept checking his watch, clearly uncomfortable, while Ariel leaned forward with the intense focus she brought to every engineering problem. "The engine project you're working on," Lexi began slowly, "it wasn't shut down because it failed. It was shut down because it succeeded too well." She pulled out her phone and showed them a photograph she had taken years earlier during one of her rare visits to her father's office. The image showed a wall covered with technical drawings, project timelines, and what appeared to be government contracts. 7 years ago, Grange Tech was developing that prototype under a military contract called Iron Phoenix. The engine wasn't designed for cars. It was designed for unmanned aerial vehicles, drones that could carry heavy payloads over long distances without refueling. Samuel's coffee cup rattled against the table as he set it down too hard. "Drones," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That explains the power-to-weight ratio specifications and the quantum amplifier components." Ariel turned to her father with surprise. "You recognize the quantum amplifier? Dad, how do you know about military-grade hardware?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it might contain answers to questions he had been avoiding for years. Finally, he looked up at his daughter with eyes that held old pain and regret. "Because I worked on the prototype for Iron Phoenix at my last job," he said, "before I became a janitor, before everything went wrong." The revelation hit Ariel like a physical blow. Her father, who had been cleaning floors at Grange Tech for years while she dreamed of proving herself to engineers who dismissed both of them, had actually been one of the engineers who designed the very system she was now trying to repair. "The test explosion that killed your friend Elijah," Lexi said gently. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" Samuel shook his head. "Elijah started asking questions about why we were building civilian automotive engines with military-grade quantum amplifiers. He wanted to know who was really funding the project and what the engines would actually be used for. 3 days later, he was dead in a testing accident that was blamed on equipment failure." He pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn photograph showing 2 men in coveralls standing next to an engine prototype that looked remarkably similar to the one Ariel had been working on. "Elijah Brooks was the best engineer I ever knew, and the most honest. When he died, I knew I had 2 choices. Keep quiet and stay alive, or ask questions and end up like him." "So you kept quiet," Ariel said, understanding flooding her voice. "You took a job as a janitor at the company that killed your friend, and you've been watching them for 7 years. I've been waiting," Samuel corrected. "Waiting for someone smart enough and brave enough to uncover what they buried. I just never imagined it would be my own daughter." Lexi leaned forward across the table. "There's more you need to know. The quantum amplifier in that engine isn't just military hardware. It's classified technology that's supposed to be used only in government facilities under strict oversight. Having it in a civilian research lab is a federal crime." She scrolled through her phone and showed them a series of documents she had photographed in her father's home office. These are shipping manifests showing quantum amplifiers being delivered to Grange Tech with falsified documentation. Someone in the government is providing restricted technology to private companies for illegal development projects. Ariel studied the documents, her mind racing through the implications. That's why they sabotaged the engine. If it had worked, if they had gone into production, eventually someone would have noticed that civilian vehicles were using classified military hardware. But why not just destroy it? Samuel asked. Why leave it sitting in a lab where someone might eventually figure it out? Because they couldn't destroy it, Lexi said grimly. The quantum amplifiers are too valuable, and there are too many people who know they exist, so they made sure the engine would never work, buried the project under corporate red tape, and kept the hardware locked away where they could access it later. Until I came along, Ariel said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Until I started fixing what they had deliberately broken. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dev Patel, who slid into the booth beside Samuel with the nervous energy of someone who had been looking over his shoulder all day. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Dr. Rohn knows what you're doing and he's bringing in outside help to stop you. Dev explained that he had been placed on administrative leave that afternoon, officially for unauthorized access to classified project data, but really because Dr. Gavin Rohn had discovered his involvement in Ariel's project. They searched my computer, confiscated my access cards, and told me not to return to the facility until further notice. But before they locked me out, I managed to download something you need to see, Dev continued, pulling out a USB drive. Project files from the original Iron Phoenix development, including test data from the day Elijah died. They moved to Lexi's apartment, where she had a secure computer system that couldn't be monitored by Grange Tech's IT department. The files Dev had recovered painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception and cover-up that went far beyond corporate malfeasance. The test data from Elijah's final day showed that the engine had been performing perfectly, running at 98% efficiency with no signs of mechanical stress or overheating. Then, at exactly 2:47 p.m., someone had sent a remote signal that triggered a catastrophic overload in the quantum amplifier, causing an explosion that destroyed the testing facility and killed everyone inside. This wasn't sabotage, Ariel said, staring at the data logs. This was murder. And now you're working on the same technology that killed him, Samuel said, his voice heavy with fear for his daughter's safety. But Ariel was already thinking ahead to the implications. If they killed Elijah to keep Iron Phoenix secret, and if they're willing to bring in outside help to stop me, then whatever I'm really fixing is bigger than just an engine prototype. Lexi nodded grimly. My father has been taking meetings with people I don't recognize, men in expensive suits who don't show up on any Grange Tech employee lists. And yesterday, he received a call that made him cancel all his appointments and lock himself in his office for 6 hours. We need to contact Detective Mendez, Samuel said. If she's investigating Elijah's death, she needs to see this evidence. But when they tried to reach Detective Irene Mendez, they discovered she had been reassigned to a different case without explanation. Her replacement, Detective Morris, claimed to have no knowledge of any investigation into Grange Tech or the circumstances surrounding Elijah Brooks's death. They're shutting down the investigation, Dev said. Someone with serious influence is making sure that no one asks questions about Iron Phoenix. As they sat in Lexi's apartment, surrounded by evidence of conspiracy and murder, Ariel felt the weight of what she had stumbled into. She had begun this challenge thinking she was proving her engineering skills to a dismissive CEO. Now she realized she was uncovering a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and industry. So what do we do now? She asked. Lexi looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. We finish what you started. We get that engine working, and we make sure the whole world sees exactly what Grange Tech has been hiding. But even as they made their plans, none of them noticed the black sedan that had been following them since they left the diner, or the fact that their every move was being reported to people who had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. The following Monday morning brought an unexpected invitation that changed the tone of everything. Walter Grange's assistant called Ariel at school, requesting her presence in the CEO's office for a progress meeting regarding her work on the engine prototype. The formal language and corporate politeness felt ominous after everything they had discovered over the weekend. Ariel arrived at Grange Tech that afternoon to find Walter's office exactly as intimidating as she had expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire research facility, while awards, patents, and photographs of Walter with various government officials lined the walls. The message was clear. This was the domain of a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment. "Please, sit down," Walter said, gesturing to a chair positioned strategically lower than his own desk. "I understand you've been making remarkable progress on our little challenge." He activated a wall-mounted display showing security footage of Ariel working in the lab over the past week. The images clearly showed her methodical approach to diagnosing and repairing the engine's problems, along with timestamps proving how many hours she had spent on the project. "Impressive dedication," Walter continued. "The kind of focus and determination we value here at Grange Tech, which is why I want to make you an offer." Walter opened a leather portfolio and slid several documents across the desk toward Ariel. Full scholarship to MIT, with guaranteed admission to their mechanical engineering program, paid internships every summer until graduation, and upon completion of your degree, a position in our advanced research division with a starting salary that most engineers don't see until they've been in the field for 10 years. The offer was everything Ariel had ever dreamed of: financial security, access to cutting-edge technology, and recognition of her abilities from one of the most powerful companies in the industry. But after everything she had learned about Iron Phoenix and Elijah's death, the generous terms felt more like a trap than an opportunity. "There is one small condition," Walter added, sliding a final document across the desk. "You would need to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding your work on the prototype. Standard corporate practice, really. Protects our intellectual property and ensures that proprietary information doesn't find its way to competitors." Ariel read through the NDA carefully, noting language that would prevent her from discussing not just the engine's technical specifications, but any information she might have discovered about the project's history or the circumstances surrounding its development. Signing this document would effectively silence her about everything they had uncovered regarding Iron Phoenix. "I need some time to think about this," Ariel said, setting the papers aside. Walter's smile remained friendly, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But I should mention that this offer has an expiration date. We'll need your decision by the end of the week." That evening, Ariel met with Samuel at their kitchen table to discuss Walter's proposal. The potential benefits were undeniable. The scholarship alone would transform their family's financial situation and open doors that might otherwise remain closed forever. But Samuel understood the true cost of accepting Walter's deal. "Some offers aren't opportunities," Samuel said, looking at his daughter with the wisdom of someone who had learned hard lessons about corporate power. "They're bribes with better grammar." "But Dad," Ariel said, "this could change everything for us. No more worrying about college tuition. No more watching you clean floors for people who treat you like you're invisible. This could be our way out." Samuel reached across the table and took his daughter's hands in his own. "Baby girl, I didn't spend 7 years watching these people to see you become one of them. We don't need their money if it comes with the price of our silence." The next day brought news that confirmed their worst fears about Grange Tech's willingness to silence opposition. Dev Patel was officially terminated for corporate espionage, with his final paycheck accompanied by legal documents threatening prosecution if he attempted to contact any current employees or discuss his work on proprietary projects. "They're not just firing me," Dev told them during a clandestine meeting at the diner. "They're trying to destroy my career. Word is already spreading through the industry that I'm a security risk. No engineering firm is going to hire someone who's been accused of stealing trade secrets." But Dev's termination had an unintended consequence. It freed him to take more direct action against Grange Tech without worrying about corporate retaliation. "Since I'm already blacklisted," he said with a grim smile, "I might as well make it count for something." Meanwhile, Ariel found herself under increasing surveillance at the facility. Security guards who had previously ignored her now tracked her movements throughout the building, Her temporary access badge was restricted to only the experimental lab and the route between there and the main entrance. Most unsettling, she discovered that her notebook had been photographed while she worked, with someone clearly documenting her technical notes and calculations. "They're watching everything you do," Lexi warned during one of their evening meetings. "My father has assigned Dr. Rohn to personally oversee your project, and Rohn has been meeting with people who definitely aren't Grange Tech employees." Lexi had been conducting her own investigation into her father's recent activities, using her access to the family home to monitor his calls and review documents he left in his home office. "He's scared," she reported. "Really scared. He spent 3 hours on the phone yesterday with someone he kept calling General Morrison, and the conversation involved a lot of discussion about containing the situation." The mention of General Morrison sent a chill through the group. Military involvement in their situation suggested that the stakes were much higher than they had realized. If the government was actively working to suppress their investigation, then exposing the truth would require more than just technical evidence. It would require a public platform that couldn't be easily silenced. "The upcoming Grange Tech Expo," Lexi said suddenly. "It's scheduled for next week, and it will have media coverage, government officials, and industry representatives. If we can get the engine working and present our evidence there, it will be impossible for them to suppress the story." But they also knew that Walter and Dr. Rohn wouldn't wait passively for them to expose Iron Phoenix. The increased surveillance, Dev's termination, and Walter's attempted bribery were all signs that Grange Tech was preparing for more aggressive action. "We need to be ready for anything," Samuel warned. "These people killed Elijah to protect their secrets, and they won't hesitate to hurt us if they think we're a threat." The pressure was mounting from all sides, but it also clarified their mission. They needed to complete Ariel's work on the engine and document everything they had discovered before Grange Tech could shut them down permanently. The expo represented their best opportunity to reveal the truth to a public audience, but it also meant they would have less than a week to prepare. "We need to move the engine," Ariel said, her mind already working through the logistics. "If they're watching the lab this closely, we can't complete the repairs there. We need somewhere they can't monitor us." Lexi nodded. "I know a place. My nonprofit has access to a tech incubator downtown. Old warehouse space with industrial equipment and no corporate oversight. We can set up a temporary lab there, but moving the engine components without being detected would require careful planning and precise timing. They would need to salvage parts during normal working hours when the lab was busy with other activities, then transport everything to their new location without triggering the enhanced security measures that had been put in place. It's risky, Dev acknowledged. If they catch us removing components, they can charge us with theft of corporate property. And if General Morrison is really involved, they might not wait for legal proceedings to stop us. Despite the dangers, Ariel felt more determined than ever to complete what she had started. The engine represented more than just a technical challenge now. It was proof that innovation could come from unexpected places, that corporate power couldn't suppress truth indefinitely, and that people like her father and Elijah deserved justice for the ways they had been silenced and dismissed. "They thought this was a dare," Ariel said as they reviewed their plans late one night in Lexi's apartment. "They wanted to humiliate me and put me in my place, but I'm about to show them what happens when you underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose." The pieces were in motion for a confrontation that would determine not just Ariel's future, but the fate of everyone who had been silenced by Grange Tech's conspiracy. The expo was still a week away, but the real battle had already begun. In his office high above the Grange Tech facility, Walter Grange stared out at the city lights and made a decision that would escalate their conflict beyond anything Ariel and her allies had imagined. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he had hoped never to use. "General Morrison," he said when the call connected. "We have a problem that requires immediate attention." The conversation that followed would bring federal agents, military contractors, and national security considerations into what had begun as a simple corporate challenge. But it would also prove that sometimes the most dangerous threats to powerful institutions come from the people they dismiss as powerless, and that underestimating a determined teenager with nothing to lose can be the greatest strategic mistake of all. General Morrison's involvement changed everything. Within hours of Walter's phone call, Unmarked vehicles began appearing in the Grange Tech parking lot, and men in dark suits started conducting security assessments throughout the facility. The message was clear. The stakes had escalated far, beyond corporate embarrassment into matters of national security, but Ariel and her allies were already moving. Using Lexi's connections in the tech nonprofit community, they had secured access to an abandoned welding bay in a converted warehouse across town. The space had once been part of a small manufacturing company that had gone out of business, leaving behind industrial equipment that was perfect for their needs. "It's not fancy," Lexi said, leading them through the dusty space filled with old welding stations and machine tools. "But it's completely off the grid. No corporate surveillance, no government monitoring, just us and whatever we can build." Working through the night, they carefully transported salvaged components from various sources. Obsolete Grange Tech prototypes that Dev had identified as suitable for their purposes, parts that Samuel had accumulated over years of facility maintenance, and specialized components that Lexi purchased through her nonprofit's technical procurement channels. The process was like performing surgery on a patient while building the operating room around them. They had to strip down the failed engine, design and rebuild it from scratch, incorporating everything they had learned about the sabotage while working around the limitations of their improvised laboratory. "The key is the quantum dampener," Ariel explained as she worked on reassembling the engine's core components. "Without it, the quantum amplifier becomes unstable and eventually explodes. That's what killed Elijah. Someone remotely disabled the dampener during his test." Samuel worked alongside his daughter with a focus and intensity she had never seen from him before. Years of suppressed engineering knowledge and creativity poured out as he helped design solutions to problems they encountered. "We can use this old transformer to regulate the power flow," he suggested, pointing to a piece of equipment they had salvaged from the warehouse's original machinery. "It's not elegant, but it'll work." Meanwhile, Detective Irene Mendez had not been as easily silenced as Grange Tech had hoped. Her reassignment to a different case had been accompanied by warnings about interfering with matters of national security, but she had continued her investigation through unofficial channels. An anonymous email containing encrypted files had reached her personal account, providing evidence that connected Grange Tech's activities to federal crimes. "I've been a cop for 23 years, Mendez told her partner, Detective Lisa Chen, as they reviewed the leaked documents in Mendez's home office. "I've seen corporate corruption, government cover-ups, and plenty of people who thought they were above the law. But this is different. This is about weapons technology being developed, outside government oversight, and people being murdered to keep it secret." The evidence was damning. Shipping records showing illegal transfer of classified technology, financial documents proving government officials were being paid through shell companies, and most importantly, technical data from Elijah Brooks's final test that clearly showed his death was no accident. But when Mendez tried to present the evidence to her superiors, she was met with resistance that confirmed her worst suspicions. "The case is closed," her captain told her firmly. "The Brooks death was ruled accidental, and any suggestion otherwise is based on unsubstantiated conspiracy theories." "Captain, I have technical data showing remote detonation of the testing equipment. This wasn't an accident. It was homicide." "Detective Mendez, you're walking on thin ice here. There are people much higher up the chain than me who want this matter dropped. If you value your career and your pension, you'll find something else to occupy your time." But Mendez had not become a detective to protect corporate interests or government secrets. That evening, she made a decision that would put her own career at risk. She began building a case independently, gathering evidence through sources that couldn't be easily traced or shut down. Back at the warehouse, Ariel's team was making remarkable progress. The rebuilt engine was taking shape, incorporating lessons learned from the failed prototype while avoiding the deliberate sabotage that had been built into the original design. But they were also working against time. The Grange Tech Expo was only days away, and they knew Walter and his allies wouldn't wait much longer before taking more direct action. "We need the original quantum dampener," Ariel said, studying the engine's partially completed assembly. "I can jury-rig a temporary solution, but for the engine to run at full capacity, we need the specific dampener that was designed for this system." The dampener was locked in Grange Tech's secure archive, in a vault that required multiple levels of authorization to access. But Lexi had been thinking about this problem for days, and she had a plan that would require her to take the biggest risk yet. "I still have my security clearance," she said. "As Walter's daughter and a major shareholder, I can access the archives legally. The question is whether I can get in and out with the dampener before anyone realizes what I'm doing." The plan was dangerous but simple. Lexi would visit Grange Tech during the day shift, when the facility was busy with normal operations, and use her legitimate access to retrieve the dampener from the archive. Samuel would monitor security communications from his janitor's station, while Dev would hack into the facility's internal network to create a distraction if necessary. Everything went smoothly until Lexi was leaving the archive, with the dampener concealed in a technical equipment bag. Dr. Gavin Rohn was waiting for her in the corridor, flanked by two security guards she didn't recognize. "Miss Grange," Rohn said with a cold smile, "I'm afraid I need to inspect your bag. There have been reports of unauthorized access to classified materials." Lexi's heart pounded as she realized she was trapped. The dampener in her bag was clearly marked with classified designation codes, and there was no innocent explanation for why she would be removing it from the facility. But before the guards could search her bag, a fire alarm began blaring throughout the building. The distraction came from an unexpected source. Samuel had triggered the building's emergency systems after overhearing radio communications between the security guards about Lexi's detention. In the confusion of the evacuation, Lexi managed to slip away from Rohn and his guards, making it to the parking lot where Dev was waiting with the engine. "That was too close," Dev said as they drove away from the facility. "They know we have the dampener now, and they know we're close to completing the engine." "Then we better finish this fast," Lexi replied, "because they're going to come after us with everything they have." Back at the warehouse, the team worked through the night to install the quantum dampener and complete the engine's final assembly. The machine that emerged from their improvised laboratory was unlike anything that had ever been built, a fusion of cutting-edge military technology, innovative engineering solutions, and pure determination. "Moment of truth," Ariel said as she prepared to start the engine for its first full test. "If this works, we've accomplished something Grange Tech's entire engineering team couldn't do. If it doesn't, it will work," Samuel said firmly. "You've put too much thought and care into this for it to fail." Ariel engaged the ignition sequence, and the warehouse filled with the sound of machinery coming to life. The engine began, with a low rumble that gradually built to a smooth, powerful roar. Digital displays showed performance metrics that exceeded even the most optimistic projections from the original Iron Phoenix specifications. For 2 full minutes, the engine ran flawlessly, generating power levels that would have been impossible with conventional automotive technology while maintaining complete stability. When Ariel finally shut it down, the silence that followed felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." But their celebration was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the warehouse. Through the windows they could see black SUVs surrounding the building, and men in tactical gear taking positions around the exits. "They found us," Dev said, moving to a window to assess their situation. "Looks like at least a dozen agents, maybe more." Samuel moved protectively toward his daughter. "This is about more than the engine now. They can't let us leave here knowing what we know." But Ariel was already thinking ahead to their next move. "The expo is tomorrow. If we can get the engine there, if we can show the world what we've discovered, they can't suppress the truth anymore." Lexi was studying the building layout, looking for alternative exits. "There's a loading dock on the south side that connects to the old railway tunnel. If we can get the engine loaded onto a truck, we might be able to get out without being caught." Working together, they managed to transfer the completed engine to a flatbed truck that had been left in the warehouse by its previous occupants. The machine was heavy and awkward, but their desperation gave them strength they didn't know they possessed. As they prepared to leave through the tunnel, Samuel turned to his daughter with an expression that mixed pride with deep concern. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that watching you refuse to give up on this has been the proudest moment of my life." "We're not giving up," Ariel replied. "We're just getting started." The Grange Tech Expo transformed the city's convention center into a showcase of automotive innovation and corporate power. Massive displays featured concept vehicles, cutting-edge manufacturing equipment, and interactive demonstrations of the latest developments in transportation technology. Government officials, military contractors, and international investors moved through the exhibits, discussing deals worth millions of dollars. Walter Grange stood at the center of it all, commanding attention as he prepared to deliver the keynote presentation that would cement his company's reputation as a leader in advanced automotive engineering. The presentation was scheduled to feature the unveiling of a revolutionary engine breakthrough that would demonstrate Grange Tech's technological superiority. But the engine Walter planned to display was a fake, a carefully constructed mock-up, designed to look impressive while hiding the fact that Grange Tech had never actually solved the technical problems that had plagued the Iron Phoenix project. The real breakthrough had been achieved by a 17-year-old girl working in an abandoned warehouse, and Walter was determined to claim credit for her work while ensuring she could never contradict his version of events. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walter announced to the packed auditorium, "today marks a historic moment in automotive engineering. After years of development, Grange Tech is proud to present the future of high-performance engines." The lights dimmed, and a massive screen descended from the ceiling, displaying technical specifications and performance projections that would have been impressive if they had been based on reality. The fake engine was wheeled onto the stage, surrounded by theatrical lighting and accompanied by pre-recorded sound effects designed to simulate the roar of advanced machinery. But as Walter reached the climax of his presentation, preparing to demonstrate the engine's supposedly revolutionary performance, something unexpected happened. Lexi Grange walked onto the stage from the wings, her presence causing a stir of confusion throughout the audience. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Lexi said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "But there's something you need to know about this engine before my father continues his presentation." Walter's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Lexi, this is highly inappropriate. Security, please escort my daughter from the stage." But before security could respond, Detective Mendez appeared in the center aisle of the auditorium, holding up her badge and a court order. "Actually, Mr. Grange, Miss Grange is here as part of an ongoing federal investigation into corporate fraud and conspiracy. She has authorization to present evidence related to your company's activities." The audience erupted in confused murmurs as Mendez made her way to the stage. "By order of the federal court, this presentation is being temporarily suspended to allow for the presentation of evidence in a matter of national security." Walter tried to maintain control of the situation. "This is outrageous. My company has done nothing wrong, and I will not allow this presentation to be hijacked by unfounded accusations." "The accusations are quite well founded," Lexi replied, activating the auditorium's presentation system to display a series of documents and technical specifications. "These are internal Grange Tech communications showing that the engine you just described has never actually worked. The prototype you're displaying is a non-functional mock-up designed to deceive investors and government officials." The evidence was damning. Emails between Walter and Dr. Rohn discussing the need to maintain the illusion of progress. Financial records showing payments to government officials in exchange for continued funding of a project they knew was fraudulent, and most importantly, technical data proving that Grange Tech had been lying about their capabilities for years. But Lexi wasn't finished. "However, the engine technology you've been claiming to develop does actually work. It was successfully completed by someone my father tried to humiliate and dismiss." The auditorium doors opened, and Ariel walked in, followed by Samuel, Dev, and a team of technicians wheeling in the real engine they had built in the warehouse. The machine looked rough compared to the polished mock-up on the stage, but even from a distance it was clear that this was actual working technology rather than an elaborate facade. "This is Ariel Washington," Lexi announced to the stunned audience. "She's 17 years old and she accomplished what Grange Tech's entire engineering team couldn't do. She built a functional engine using the Iron Phoenix specifications that your company has been lying about for years." Walter tried to regain control of the situation. "This is a setup. That girl is not qualified to work on advanced engineering projects, and any claims about her alleged accomplishments are fabricated. Then let's test that claim, Ariel said, stepping up to the microphone. Your engine doesn't work because it's fake. Mine does work because I actually understand the technology. She moved to the real engine and began the startup sequence, her actions confident and precise despite the pressure of performing in front of hundreds of witnesses. The machine began with a low hum that gradually built to a powerful, steady roar that filled the auditorium with sound that was unmistakably genuine. The audience watched in amazement as digital displays showed performance metrics that exceeded every specification Walter had claimed for his fake prototype. The engine ran smoothly and powerfully, demonstrating capabilities that represented a genuine breakthrough in automotive engineering. But the demonstration was interrupted by Dr. Rohn, who rushed toward the engine controls in an apparent attempt to shut down the system. "This is dangerous," he shouted. "The engine is unstable and could explode." Lexi intercepted him before he could reach the controls. "The only thing that's dangerous here is letting you sabotage another engine the way you sabotaged the one that killed Elijah Brooks." The struggle between Lexi and Rohn triggered an emergency lockdown system that sealed the auditorium, trapping everyone inside while security systems assessed the perceived threat. In the confusion that followed, Dev activated a presentation system that began displaying the evidence they had gathered about the Iron Phoenix conspiracy. The audience found themselves watching a comprehensive presentation that included the technical data from Elijah's death, financial records showing illegal payments to government officials, and documented proof that Grangetech had been systematically lying about their capabilities while stealing taxpayer money through fraudulent contracts. "This is what my father and Dr. Rohn were trying to hide," Lexi announced as the evidence played on screens throughout the auditorium. "They've been running a criminal conspiracy that has cost lives and defrauded the government of millions of dollars." Walter made one final attempt to control the narrative. "None of this matters. Even if there were problems with our previous development efforts, we've now successfully completed the project. The engine works, and Grangetech deserves credit for its development." "The engine works because of me," Ariel replied firmly. "Not because of your company, not because of your engineers, and definitely not because of your leadership. It works because I refuse to accept your limitations and your lies." She looked out at the audience of investors, officials, and media representatives who had come to witness what they thought would be a routine corporate presentation. Innovation doesn't belong to companies like Grangetech. It belongs to anyone who's willing to work hard enough and think creatively enough to solve problems that others have given up on. As the lockdown system began to disengage and security personnel moved to arrest Walter and Dr. Rohn, Ariel continued speaking to the crowd. "For too long, people like my father and me have been told that we don't belong in places like this, that we don't have the qualifications or the background to contribute to advanced technology development. But talent and determination don't care about your background or your credentials." The real engine continued to run flawlessly throughout her speech, its steady power serving as proof that innovation could indeed come from the most unexpected places. The sound filled the auditorium like a declaration that the future of technology would be built by those who refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose on them. Detective Mendez moved through the crowd, coordinating with federal agents who had been waiting outside the convention center for the evidence presentation to conclude. Walter and Dr. Rohn were taken into custody, along with several other Grangetech executives who had been complicit in the Iron Phoenix conspiracy. As the immediate crisis resolved, Ariel found herself surrounded by reporters, investors, and engineering professionals who wanted to understand how she had accomplished what an entire corporate research team had failed to achieve. But her attention was focused on her father, who stood nearby with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, baby girl," Samuel said as he embraced his daughter. "You didn't just fix an engine. You fixed everything they tried to break in people like us." The expo had been intended as Walter's moment of triumph, a chance to showcase Grangetech's supposed technological superiority while humiliating a teenager who had dared to challenge his authority. Instead, it became the moment when the truth about corporate fraud, government corruption, and the murder of an honest engineer was finally revealed to the world. But more than that, it became proof that innovation, determination, and moral courage could triumph over power, money, and institutional corruption. Ariel had not just built an engine, she had built a future where talent would be recognized regardless of its source, and where the truth would not be silenced by those who profited from deception. The video footage from the Grange Tech Expo spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, clips of Ariel powering up her engine while Walter's fake prototype sat silent on the stage had been viewed millions of times. News networks picked up the story, framing it as everything from a David and Goliath tale of teenage genius to a damning indictment of corporate corruption in the defense industry. The hashtags, "The engine that roared and Ariel built it," began trending globally, accompanied by discussions about systemic barriers in STEM fields and the importance of giving opportunities to underrepresented voices in engineering. But for Ariel, sitting in her family's modest living room while news vans lined their street, the sudden fame felt surreal and overwhelming. "I can't believe this is happening," she said, watching a CNN segment that featured her engine demonstration alongside analysis from engineering professors and industry experts. "3 weeks ago, nobody knew my name. Now everyone wants to interview me." Samuel sat beside his daughter, still processing the dramatic changes in their lives. "You earned this recognition, baby girl. Every bit of it. You proved that innovation doesn't care about zip codes or bank accounts." The phone had been ringing constantly with requests from universities, engineering firms, and media outlets. MIT called to personally invite Ariel to visit their campus. Tesla sent representatives to discuss potential collaboration. Even NASA reached out, expressing interest in her work with advanced propulsion systems. But the most significant call came from the Grange Tech Board of Directors, informing them that Walter Grange had been removed as CEO and that the company was undergoing complete restructuring under new leadership. The person chosen to guide that transformation was someone they knew well. Lexi Grange stood before the Grange Tech Employee Assembly 3 days after the expo, addressing a workforce that was still reeling from the revelations about their former leadership. Many employees had been completely unaware of the Iron Phoenix conspiracy, believing they were working on legitimate automotive research rather than fraudulent military contracts. "I know many of you are questioning everything you thought you knew about this company," Lexi began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had risked everything to expose the truth. "You have every right to feel betrayed and confused. The leadership you trusted was lying to you just as much as they were lying to our customers in the government." She outlined her vision for a transformed Grange Tech, a company that would focus on sustainable transportation innovation, ethical business practices, and creating opportunities for engineers from diverse backgrounds. The military contracts that had been the source of so much corruption would be abandoned in favor of civilian applications that could actually improve people's lives. "We're going to rebuild this company on a foundation of honesty, innovation, and inclusion," Lexi announced. "And we're going to start by acknowledging the people who were dismissed and overlooked by our previous leadership." Samuel Washington was offered the position of Senior Engineering Advisor, with a mandate to help design ethical oversight systems that would prevent future corruption. The offer came with a salary that was 10 times what he had been earning as a janitor, along with recognition as a key contributor to the engine breakthrough that had exposed the conspiracy. But Samuel surprised everyone by declining the corporate position. "I appreciate the offer," he told Lexi during a private meeting, "but I've spent too many years watching talented people get crushed by corporate bureaucracy. I want to do something that actually helps the next generation of engineers." Instead, Samuel partnered with Dev Patel to establish the Brooks Engineering Institute, named in honor of Elijah Brooks and funded by a substantial settlement from Grange Tech's insurance company. The institute would provide hands-on technical education to students from underserved communities, teaching practical engineering skills alongside ethical principles that had been missing from traditional corporate environments. "Elijah died because he was honest about what he saw," Samuel explained to the crowd gathered for the institute's groundbreaking ceremony. "The best way to honor his memory is to make sure future engineers have the tools and support they need, to choose honesty over complicity." Dev's reinstatement at Grange Tech came with a promotion to Chief Technology Officer and a mandate to completely overhaul the company's engineering practices. His first initiative was establishing a whistleblower protection program and an ethics review board that included external oversight from engineering professional organizations. "We're not just changing policies, Dev told the engineering staff during his first department meeting. We're changing culture. From now on, speaking truth about technical problems is not just encouraged, it's required. Detective Mendez found herself at the center of a federal task force investigating corporate technology crimes, with the Grange Tech case serving as a model for how to prosecute companies that defraud government contracts while endangering public safety. Her persistence in pursuing the truth despite institutional pressure had earned her recognition as a leader in the fight against corporate corruption. The Grange Tech investigation showed us that traditional law enforcement approaches aren't sufficient for these kinds of crimes, Mendez explained to a congressional hearing on corporate accountability. We need specialized units with technical expertise and the authority to investigate across corporate and government boundaries. The legal consequences for Walter Grange and his co-conspirators were severe and swift. Federal prosecutors charged them with conspiracy, fraud, manslaughter in Elijah's death, and violations of national security laws related to the illegal use of classified technology. The evidence that Ariel and her team had gathered made prosecution straightforward, leading to guilty pleas and substantial prison sentences. Dr. Gavin Rohn, facing charges that could result in life imprisonment, attempted to negotiate a plea deal by providing information about other companies involved in similar conspiracies. His testimony revealed that the Iron Phoenix project was just one part of a larger network of illegal technology transfers between defense contractors and private corporations. But for all the legal and corporate changes, the most significant impact of Ariel's achievement was its effect on young people who saw themselves reflected in her story. Engineering programs across the country reported dramatic increases in applications from students who had previously felt excluded from technical fields. Seeing someone who looks like me succeed in engineering changed everything, said Jasmine Williams, a high school senior from Detroit who applied to MIT's engineering program after watching Ariel's expo demonstration. It made me realize that my background was an asset, not an obstacle. Universities began reaching out to community colleges, vocational schools, and high schools in underserved areas, recognizing that traditional recruitment methods had been missing significant pools of talent. The Ariel effect became shorthand for the transformation in how engineering education approached diversity and inclusion. Meanwhile, Ariel found herself grappling with choices she had never imagined having. Every major university in the country was offering her full scholarships. Engineering firms were competing for her attention with increasingly generous internship packages, and venture capitalists were approaching her family with offers to fund her own company. I could go anywhere, do anything, she told Samuel one evening as they sat in their garage, surrounded by the engines and projects that had started her journey. MIT, Stanford, Caltech, they all want me. But I keep thinking about what you said about dreaming bigger than what other people expect. Samuel looked at his daughter with the wisdom of someone who had learned the difference between success and fulfillment through difficult experience. What do you want to do, baby girl? Not what would impress other people or make the most money, but what would make you excited to get up every morning? Ariel's answer surprised even herself. I want to start my own company. I want to build engines that can help people in places where transportation is still a barrier to opportunity. Clean, efficient, affordable technology that can change lives. The decision to launch ForgeCore immediately after high school graduation was controversial. Engineering professors argued that she needed formal education before attempting to run a technology company. Business advisors warned that the automotive industry would crush an inexperienced teenager, regardless of her technical abilities. But Ariel had learned that the biggest breakthroughs often came from ignoring conventional wisdom and trusting her own judgment. With financial backing from investors who had witnessed her expo demonstration and technical support from a team of engineers who shared her vision, ForgeCore began operations in the same warehouse where she had completed her first engine. We're not trying to compete with the big automotive companies, Ariel explained to reporters at ForgeCore's launch announcement. We're trying to serve communities and applications that they've ignored. Rural areas that need reliable transportation. Developing regions where fuel efficiency can mean the difference between prosperity and poverty. Emergency services that need equipment they can depend on. The first ForgeCore engine was designed for agricultural applications in sub-Saharan Africa, where farmers needed reliable power for irrigation systems but couldn't afford the fuel costs of traditional engines. By adapting her quantum amplifier technology for much smaller applications, Ariel created a system that could run on minimal fuel while providing consistent power output. Innovation should serve humanity, not just profit margins, became ForgeCore's unofficial motto, reflecting values that had been shaped by watching her father's dignity survive years of being dismissed and overlooked by corporate leadership that measured worth only in terms of formal credentials and social connections. The annual ForgeCore Challenge became an international event, bringing together young engineers from around the world to compete in designing solutions to real-world transportation problems. The first challenge focused on emergency response vehicles for disaster relief, with winning designs being manufactured and donated to humanitarian organizations. The goal isn't just to find the next generation of engineers, Ariel explained to the crowd gathered for the inaugural challenge. It's to change how we think about who gets to be an engineer and what engineering is supposed to accomplish. As ForgeCore's reputation grew, so did its impact on the broader industry. Major automotive companies began copying its community-focused approach. While engineering schools started incorporating social responsibility into their curricula, the success of a company founded by a teenager with no formal business training forced established industries to reconsider their assumptions about innovation and leadership. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Elijah Brooks Memorial Foundation, established by his family with settlement money from the Grange Tech case, announced that its first annual award for engineering integrity would go to Ariel Washington for her courage in exposing corporate corruption and her commitment to ethical innovation. Elijah believed that engineering should make the world better for everyone, not just for those who could afford to buy the latest technology, said Marcus Brooks, Elijah's younger brother, during the award ceremony. Ariel embodies that same spirit, and we're honored to recognize her as someone who carries forward his legacy. 5 years had passed since the day a 17-year-old girl had walked onto the stage at the Grange Tech Expo and changed everything. The sleek solar-powered race car that now streaked across the Bonneville salt flats bore little resemblance to the improvised engine that had started it all, but the revolutionary propulsion system at its heart was a direct descendant of Ariel's breakthrough. New world land speed record confirmed, the race official announced over the radio as the ForgeCore-powered vehicle crossed the timing sensors. 278 miles per hour, sustained for over 12 minutes without refueling. Ariel stood at the edge of the salt flats, watching her latest creation disappear into the distance with a smile that mixed professional satisfaction with the pure joy of seeing an impossible idea become reality. At 22, she had become one of the most recognized names in automotive engineering. But more importantly, she had proven that innovation could serve humanity rather than just corporate profit margins. ForgeCore had grown from a startup in Thailand, an abandoned warehouse, to an international company with partnerships across 6 continents. Their engines powered everything from medical transport vehicles in remote African villages to emergency response equipment in major American cities. But the company's greatest achievement wasn't measured in sales figures or market share. It was measured in the doors that had been opened for people who had previously been excluded from technical innovation. The funny thing is, Ariel told the documentary crew that had been following her for the past year, I never set out to change the engineering industry. I just wanted to prove that the engine could work. The documentary, titled The Engine That Roared, How One Teenager Exposed a Conspiracy and Transformed an Industry, had premiered at Sundance and was being distributed to schools across the country as part of a STEM education initiative. But for Ariel, the most important audience was the young people who saw their own potential reflected in her story. Lexi Grange had successfully transformed Grange Tech from a corrupt defense contractor into a certified B Corporation focused on sustainable transportation solutions. The company's new mission statement, Technology That Serves Humanity, was displayed prominently in every facility, alongside portraits of engineers from diverse backgrounds who had contributed to the company's innovations. My father built this company on a foundation of exclusion and deception, Lexi explained during her keynote address at the annual Corporate Social Responsibility Conference. Rebuilding it required more than just changing policies. It required changing our fundamental understanding of what success looks like. Under Lexi's leadership, Grange Tech had become a model for ethical corporate transformation. Their supply chain was completely transparent, their research was published openly, and their hiring practices prioritized talent and potential over traditional credentials. The company's workforce had become one of the most diverse in the industry, reflecting a commitment to finding innovation wherever it might originate. But Lexi's most significant contribution was her decision to step back from day-to-day operations and join ForgeCore's board as a strategic advisor. "I realize that my role isn't to run companies," she explained to business journalists. "It's to help create systems that prevent the kind of corruption that my father represented." Samuel Washington and Dev Patel had built the Brooks Engineering Institute into one of the most respected technical education programs in the country. Their graduates were sought after by engineering firms around the world, not just for their technical skills, but for their commitment to ethical practice and innovative problem-solving. "We don't just teach people how to build things," Samuel explained to visitors touring the Institute's labs and workshops. "We teach them to think about why they're building things and who those things are supposed to serve." The Institute's approach to education was radically different from traditional engineering programs. Students worked on real-world projects, from their first day, collaborating with community organizations to solve actual problems rather than completing theoretical exercises. The curriculum included courses on engineering ethics, social responsibility, and the historical role of technology in either perpetuating or dismantling inequality. Elijah died because he asked the right questions at the wrong time, Dev told new students during orientation. "Our job is to make sure you're prepared to ask the right questions at the right time, and to support each other when those questions lead to difficult answers." Detective Irene Mendez had become the head of the FBI's Corporate Technology Crimes Task Force, leading investigations into companies that attempted to defraud government contracts or misuse classified technology. The techniques she had developed during the Grange Tech investigation had been adopted by law enforcement agencies around the world. The Grange Tech case taught us that corporate crime in the technology sector requires specialized investigative approaches, Mendez explained to a gathering of international law enforcement officials. "These aren't traditional white-collar crimes. They involve national security implications, complex technical evidence, and conspiracies that can span multiple companies and government agencies." Her task force had successfully prosecuted dozens of cases involving illegal technology transfers, corporate espionage, and defense contractor fraud. But more importantly, their high-profile successes had created a deterrent effect that had significantly reduced corporate willingness to engage in illegal technology development. The ripple effects of Ariel's achievement continued to spread through the engineering world in unexpected ways. Universities had fundamentally changed their recruitment and admission practices, recognizing that traditional metrics had been systematically excluding talented students from non-traditional backgrounds. The Ariel Washington case study is now required reading in every engineering ethics course in the country, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, Dean of Engineering at Stanford University. "It demonstrates how technical excellence and moral courage can work together to expose systemic problems and create positive change." Engineering firms had also been forced to reconsider their hiring practices and corporate cultures. The success of ForgeCore had demonstrated that diverse teams consistently outperformed homogeneous ones in developing innovative solutions to complex problems. "We used to hire people who looked like us and thought like us," admitted Robert Taylor, Chief Technology Officer at Ford Motor Company. "Ariel showed us that our definition of qualified was actually limiting our ability to innovate." The ESA's annual ForgeCore Challenge had grown into the world's largest youth engineering competition, with participants from over 90 countries competing to develop solutions to pressing global problems. But unlike traditional engineering competitions that focused on theoretical problems, the ForgeCore Challenge required participants to work with communities that would actually use their innovations. "Engineering isn't an abstract intellectual exercise," Ariel explained to the thousands of young engineers gathered for the challenge's 5th anniversary. "It's about understanding people's needs and figuring out how technology can make their lives better." This year's challenge focused on climate adaptation technologies for coastal communities facing rising sea levels. The winning team, composed of teenagers from Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Louisiana, had developed a modular flood barrier system powered by tidal energy that could be manufactured locally using recycled materials. These young engineers understand something that took me years to learn, Ariel said as she presented the winning trophy. The best solutions come from understanding problems from the inside, not from trying to impose outside ideas on communities that have their own knowledge and expertise. As she watched the celebration of young innovators from around the world, Ariel reflected on how different her life had become from what she had imagined during those early days of working on the engine prototype. She had expected to prove herself to the engineering establishment and perhaps earn admission to a good university. Instead, she had exposed a criminal conspiracy, transformed an industry, and inspired a generation of young people to see engineering as a tool for social justice. But the moment that meant the most to her came later that evening, during a quiet conversation with a 14-year-old girl named Maya Okafor, whose team had developed an innovative water purification system for rural communities. "I want to do what you did," Maya said earnestly. "I want to build things that help people and show everyone that kids like us can be engineers too." Ariel looked at the young girl, seeing in her eyes the same determination and curiosity that had driven her to challenge Walter Grange's assumptions years earlier. "You already are an engineer," she told Maya. "You just proved it with your project. The question now is what you want to build next." As the evening wound down and participants began making plans to return to their home countries, Ariel found herself thinking about the future with the same excitement she had felt when first examining that supposedly impossible engine. ForgeCore was developing new applications for quantum amplifier technology that could revolutionize aerospace propulsion. The Brooks Institute was expanding internationally, bringing ethical engineering education to communities around the world. And most importantly, a new generation of engineers was entering the field with a fundamentally different understanding of what their profession could accomplish. Walter Grange, meanwhile, sat in a federal prison, serving a 25-year sentence for conspiracy, fraud, and manslaughter. His appeals had been exhausted, his assets had been seized to pay restitution to his victims, and his name had become synonymous with corporate corruption in engineering circles. He spent his days in the prison library, reading news articles about ForgeCore's latest achievements and the continued success of the people he had tried to dismiss and destroy. The irony was not lost on him that the janitor's daughter he had attempted to humiliate had built a more successful and respected company than he had ever managed. Dr. Gavin Rohn had died in prison 2 years earlier, his health broken by the stress of prosecution and the knowledge that his career in engineering had been built on deception and complicity in murder. His final letter, published posthumously, had been an apology to Elijah Brooks's family and a warning to other engineers about the moral compromises that could lead to criminal participation. But the most fitting memorial to the transformation that had begun with Ariel's challenge was the new exhibit at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The original engine that Ariel had rebuilt in the warehouse now stood in a place of honor, surrounded by educational displays about innovation, perseverance, and the importance of giving opportunities to voices that had traditionally been excluded from technical fields. The exhibit's centerpiece was a simple placard with a quote from Ariel's expo presentation. "Innovation doesn't belong to companies or institutions. It belongs to anyone willing to work hard enough and think creatively enough to solve problems that others have given up on." Thousands of visitors pass through the exhibit every month, many of them young people who stopped to read about how a teenager with no formal engineering education had accomplished what an entire corporate research team could not. For many of those visitors, the story served as proof that their own dreams and ambitions were not limited by other people's expectations or assumptions. As Ariel stood in her new laboratory, surrounded by prototypes for flying vehicles that would soon make her original engine breakthrough seem quaint by comparison, she thought about how much had changed since that day when she had whispered, "Challenge accepted," in an empty testing facility. She had proven that talent and determination could overcome institutional barriers, that truth could triumph over corruption, and that innovation could serve humanity rather than just corporate profits. But more importantly, she had shown that the future belonged to people who refused to accept the limitations that others tried to impose on them. "You think the engine was hard?" she said to Marcus Brooks, Elijah's brother, who had joined ForgeCore as head of community partnerships. Wait till we change the sky. Outside her laboratory windows, the first prototype of ForgeCore's flying vehicle sat on the testing pad, its quantum-powered propulsion system ready for initial flight trials. The machine represented the next step in a journey that had begun with a dare, continued through exposure of a conspiracy, and was now reaching toward possibilities that had once seemed like science fiction. But for Ariel, the most important part of that journey wasn't the technology or the recognition or even the justice that had been served. It was the knowledge that somewhere, a young person was looking at what seemed like an impossible problem and thinking, I can fix that. The legacy of the engine that roared wasn't just technological innovation or corporate transformation. It was the understanding that the future would be built by people who had the courage to challenge assumptions, the determination to persist through obstacles, and the wisdom to use their talents in service of something larger than themselves. The IG revolution had indeed begun, not with violence or politics, but with a teenage girl who had refused to accept that there were problems beyond her ability to solve, and that revolution was just getting started. What happens when the world finally stops underestimating the voices it's been silencing, and how many brilliant minds are we still overlooking in our own communities? Like and subscribe for more stories about courage, innovation, and the power of refusing to stay invisible.